Thank you all for coming. Again, you can move up to the front if you want. My name is Peggy Anderson. I started Can I Help You in January after doing a pilot program down at Mirabella last October, where I had 90 residents that showed up that were really interested in learning more about cannabis and the benefits for sleep, pain, anxiety, appetite, and autoimmune disease. So to start off our program today, again, thank you for coming in this cool room today. And we're going to watch a documentary that Weedmap did. It's 15 minutes about the exit drug, and I hope you enjoy it.
I think one thing that led to the opioid crisis is lack of treatments, lack of options.
We're focusing on the wrong thing.
So doctors need to be able to practice medicine.
There's Norco, Vicodin, heroin.
The only thing that I would want was for all that pain to stop.
Patients would rather die than go through that again.
Methadone, Percocet.
I turned into a really ugly person.
Morphine, fentanyl.
I mean, they were taking 10, 15, 20 different prescription drugs a day.
Why all of the addiction? And what are we going to do about it?
There is overwhelming evidence. There is irrefutable evidence that cannabis is safe and effective. Cannabis is the gateway to getting out of opioid abuse. This is not my opinion. This is evidence that cannabis is an effective and safe substitute for pain-relieving drugs like prescription opioid analgesics. My name is Dr. Adi Poe. I am a neuroscientist who has studied the interaction between cannabis and opioids for the last 13 years or so. The most exciting and promising value in medicinal cannabis is the sheer volume of people's lives who will be improved. So we're not just talking about people who will stay alive because they didn't overdose on opioids. We're also talking about all those people who are suffering and there is no alternative and no other drugs have worked.
It is so hard to have to tell a family member, hey, your child died or your family member died from opioids, and then go to the next patient complaining of pain and prescribe him the same thing that just killed this other person. I might as well be like, here's a needle, here's a syringe. You might as well just start heroin because this is where it's going to end up. I've been an ER physician for 6 years, and I've been involved with medical marijuana for greater than a year. I've seen people die from heroin. I've seen kids die from taking opioids. I've seen people die from benzo overdose. I have not, till this day, seen somebody die from marijuana.
I'm Mark Wallace. I'm an anesthesiologist, boarded in anesthesiology and pain medicine. I'm chair of the Division of Pain Medicine here at UC San Diego. A lot of the heroin users got their start with prescription opioids. That led the CDC to start taking a look at this, the Center for Disease Control, and saying, we have a problem.
In 2016, the Centers for Disease Control came out with a set of guidelines in order to curb this crisis. One of those was that we need to switch to non-opioid drugs for most cases of chronic pain. The National Academies looked at more than 10,000 studies in humans, only published since 1999, and they definitively concluded that not specific cannabinoids, not isolated cannabinoids, cannabis is indeed safe and effective for the treatment of chronic pain. So the CDC was asking for non-opioid alternatives, and the National Academies has given us an answer, and that's cannabis. The roots of the opioid epidemic are really in the early 90s. The American Pain Society came out with some publications in support from consumer advocate groups and patient advocate groups. They all came together and said, hey, we have a huge crisis of untreated pain in this country. At the same time, the emergence of oxycodone happened. So all of a sudden, you have this untreated pain epidemic combined with this brand new, what was thought of as a miracle drug. The evidence that we have now, obviously, is that there is no difference between oxycodone or any of these other prescription drugs and heroin.
Currently, in the United States, over 91 people a day dying from opioids. It's a terrible killer. We lose over 50 veterans a day now to prescription drug overdose and suicide.
It's not that they want to become addicted, but they either start depending on it or it's difficult for them to learn how to deal with pain.
There's an overlap between addiction and pain, which makes it very, very difficult. I think the answer is probably just to try to prevent them from going on the opioid in the first place.
Cannabis is safe and effective for the treatment of chronic pain, which opioids are not. Opioids are really great at treating severe pain, but over the long term, their utility is diminished because of the severe side effects that accompany them. In order to get pain relief, you have to suffer through those side effects. And one of the reasons that cannabis is an effective alternative to opioids is because it does not produce those side effects. We discovered that the active molecule in the cannabis plant was delta-9 THC. That was in the 60s, but it wasn't until the early 90s that we really identified what it was inside of our own bodies that was activating the same receptors that THC was.
We have cannabinoid receptors all over our body. They're located on inflammatory cells, white blood cells, lymphocytes. They're located all throughout the nervous system, both the peripheral nerves, the spinal cord, the brain. They have anti-inflammatory effects. They have various properties that have health benefits. And then the cannabinoid 1 receptors, when you stimulate them, you actually reduce pain transmission into the nervous system.
We have thousands of veterans who have used cannabis to get completely off of opiates. We have tens of thousands more who've used it to dramatically decrease the amount of opiates that they take. Cannabis saved my life, and it saved the lives of thousands of other people as well.
When patients are given access to cannabis, they automatically reduce how much opioids they consume. And if people are consuming fewer opioids, then we have fewer opioid overdoses. And this is evidenced in the literature. At what point from injury to opioid overdose death is cannabis intervening to prevent opioid overdose? So there are lots of possibilities. It could be that early on, they start using cannabis instead of opioids. So you have the prevention of opioid use entirely, or you have the prevention of opioid escalation. So instead of taking more and more opioids because they've developed a physical dependence and tolerance, they switch to cannabis.
The nature of opioids is that you need to take more and more to experience the high that you had in the past. People don't really realize how addictive it is. So just the pain of coming off opioids sometimes maintains people on the opioids because they don't want to go through this experience.
I've had many patients in my practice that have been able to wean themselves off of narcotics and use marijuana instead.
Now, it's also possible that once people are physically dependent upon opioids, they turn to cannabis for help. Cannabis can alleviate the withdrawal symptoms, this very bottom of the barrel human suffering. Opioid withdrawal, I can assure you, is probably the 7th level of hell.
Heroin detox is the worst physical feeling I've ever felt. The worst flu you've ever had, mixed with a stomach virus, fluids just coming out of you everywhere. There's a whole mental part to it too, where you lose interest in everything. You want to jump out of your own skin.
I don't even know if there's words to describe the degree of pain and suffering. You know, it's like breaking 1,000 bones all at once while your skin has needles being shoved into it, while you're burning up from the inside out but freezing at the same time, and projectile vomiting and probably experiencing diarrhea all at once.
Now, I took 180 milligrams of OxyContin a day and 40 milligrams of Ambien just to be able to sleep 1 to 2 hours at night. The only thing that separated me from poor guy or gal that was shooting heroin under the bridge is the fact that I was able to obtain my opiates legally.
The brain does not care whether you're getting this drug from a prescription or whether you're getting this drug from a street corner.
When I was 16, I was introduced to OxyContin, and my love affair with opiates really took off. Eventually, my sister and I were up to smoking 10, 15 pills a day. I mean, they did nothing for us because we had built such a high tolerance. Eventually we moved to heroin.
As a social worker, one of our foundational principles is to reduce harm and to let people grow and determine their own life. Cannabis allows us to do that. It's important to know that people can replace the use of something that's hurting them or killing them with medicinally dispensed cannabis. It does make the detox infinitely more tolerable.
The first few days went by much easier than any other detox program I've ever been through. Cannabis really helps in those early days. Something a lot of people in the recovery community don't understand. Maybe there's old stigmas, but cannabis really does help keep me off chemicals that would kill me. Any movement in that direction, away from killing yourself, is progress, and that's harm reduction to me.
It is very tempting to tell patients, hey, narcotics are not the answer. I think you should try medical marijuana. I feel like that will be more beneficial for you. But the fact that it is federally illegal, providers are not doing it.
I was first introduced to opioids when I was about 18. I was a senior in high school, and I kept taking them. I didn't really think there would be any consequences. I started smoking heroin almost every day, or as often as I could get it. I was using heroin for probably close to 5 years. 5 years straight, yeah. Every day, became about getting high, not wanting to feel sick. The only thing, that I would want was for all that pain to stop. And that meant finding heroin, finding opiates immediately.
I absolutely believe that if anyone's earned the right to decide what to put into their bodies to treat their injuries, their pain, their mental health, who would that be other than veterans? We have all these brave men and women, all these American heroes coming home after surviving some horrendous combat situations only to be killed by the people that are supposed to be taking care of them.
So this is just a huge shame. If almost every single veteran could probably have their quality of life enhanced if they were allowed to bring cannabis into their regimen. A vet can't even talk to their VA doctor about cannabis medicine because the VA doctor is a federal employee and cannabis is a federally controlled substance. Everyone wants more information about cannabis as a therapeutic. In the most recent request for the DEA to reschedule cannabis, the DEA did their job and turned to the FDA and said, can you tell us, is this safe and effective? The FDA, through their very vigorous and rigorous process, concluded that no, there was not sufficient evidence to downgrade cannabis from a Schedule I. This is the nature of the catch-22 in cannabis medical research. You can't get data because it's a Schedule I, and it's a Schedule I because there's not enough data.
The definition of Schedule I is there's no medicinal use. High abuse potential, no medicinal use. Well, we know that the abuse potential is low, and we know that there's a lot of medicinal benefits from it.
I am a pharmacologist, and when I look at the cannabis plant, I see incredibly complex pharmacology. I see hundreds of biologically active molecules, which have a variety of effects on the brain and the body. In the FDA approval process, typically their formula is that the drug is one molecule and that there is one indication, one illness. If you think about the clinical use of cannabis medicine, it is neither of those things. It is not one molecule. It is not a standard preparation. It's not just being used for pain. It's being used for anxiety, for PTSD, for insomnia, for Crohn's, for many, many things. So on both sides of the equation, cannabis does not fit into the regulatory framework which the FDA has set up in order to bring an experimental drug, a preclinical drug, into the marketplace.
It's all about education. We just have to put pressure on the people who are in control and don't give up, and just know that eventually the word will get through and the change will occur.
I started medical marijuana practice because of the opioid epidemic. I feel like medical marijuana is the answer. I would much rather have a patient rely on marijuana than have to rely on a benzo or rely on a narcotic. Because people are not dying from overdoses of marijuana. There hasn't been a case.
If you look at states that have passed medicinal cannabis laws, on average, there is a 25% drop in fatal opioid overdoses. Now, that effect gets larger the longer that law has been instituted. So for instance, in the state of California, which has had a medicinal law since 1996, there's actually a 33% reduction in their opioid overdose rate.
I'm using cannabis to get my patients off of opioids. It's amazing how many people will wean off slowly, and now they're in a lot of pain. And then I'll introduce the cannabis and they feel better. And they say the difference is they feel that I've given their life back because they felt a slave to the opioid, and that they're looking at their clock when I'm going to get my next opioid, when is my next dose. When you take them off the opioid and put them on the cannabis, they stop looking at the clock, and they don't feel a slave to it.
We're focusing on the wrong thing. Medical marijuana should not be classified as the alternative. It should be the first line of treatment.
Cannabis probably has the greatest potential to have a major impact on public health, specifically through its ability to diminish our reliance on opioids. This is cannabis's greatest opportunity to do the most good in the world right now.
Thank you. So with that, I'd like to bring Dr. Lay up. He is with the Green Earth Medicinal Clinic and also with Endomira, which is his company that produces, you want to explain?
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming. Well, thank you, Peggy, too, for putting us on, and the Caputo group. The team is here. It's my first time meeting them, so thank you for the invitation as well. That was actually a very good little video because it highlights a lot of the really key things that I've been doing for years, educating, or what I say, re-educating the public. So yes, my company's name is Endomira, and we produce a product called Green Earth Medicinals. And it's back there to tape, but there's other CBD products here that are well known as well. Green Earth Medicine Clinic, though, was the original. That was my clinic that I formed over the past 8 years here in the state of Oregon. Formed around the idea of really informing myself as a physician on the true scientific medical properties of cannabis and how to use it in patients safely and effectively. Because when I came into it 8 years ago, what I found was that patients were getting a lot of kind of folk remedy ideas about how to use cannabis that's been applied for many years. And I wanted to bring some more scientific rigor to the process. And so I formed this clinic that specializes in just providing consultations and advice to patients on how to use cannabis safely and effectively. You know, bringing real science to it. And so that's a little bit of background about me. I spent 20-something years in the conventional healthcare world, working in hospitals, running ICU programs and emergency rooms, lots of programs for hospitals. My last position was medical director of inpatient services at St. Charles, which is out in Bend. So the whole Central Oregon area was under my management, teams of doctors working for the hospital. Can you guys all hear me okay?
Yeah, use the microphone.
Use it? So you're recording, right? Is it on? Okay, good. So I'm here to answer questions. Rather than putting up a bunch of slides, which would have been fun and informative for you as well, but it would take a lot of time. You know, so Peggy and I said, you know, maybe it'd be better to just kind of make this a free flow. Maybe she'll ask me some questions. Maybe I'll throw out some topics. Maybe you guys will ask me questions. I'll be happy to answer them. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not for me, it's my wife who suffers from fibromyalgia. She's also fused from her tailbone to the second rib on her spine. And I go to the local dispensary and get her 100% CBD or 1-to-1, you know, and she doses. But what I would like to know is how do you figure out dosing?
Yeah. Good question. So, gosh, there's so much. You know, I spent a lot of time. So before we get to dosing, let's start with the basics of cannabis, which is which compounds in the cannabis plant is going to be helpful for which conditions. Okay, this is the area of current and ongoing research that will take us many decades. Taken all together, cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoids, these are the three big groups of compounds in cannabis. There's about 333 of them that we've discovered so far. Okay? It's a lot of different compounds. So you've only heard about CBD and THC for the most part. There's many other compounds. And here's the important thing to recognize, and they mentioned this, I'm glad they mentioned it. Cannabis, like most plant medicines, they don't work anything like the pharmaceutical drug concept, where we, for the most part, imitate Mother Nature by synthesizing a chemical version of that compound from nature and putting it into a pill form, okay? Cannabis doesn't work that way. Plant medicines don't work that way for the most part. It's a whole team of compounds, what we call synergistic compounds, okay? Think about it this way. If CBD was your quarterback, all right, you cannot play football with just a quarterback. You need the rest of the team to make that quarterback effective. Same thing with the THC molecule. So the idea is that to benefit truly from cannabis, you have to use it in a synergistic way. Okay, so when it comes to the conversation about pain, you know, most of pain, such as what you're describing in your wife, it's a combination of not just pain, which is signals that travel throughout your nervous system, right, from the source of the injury to the brain to let you know that there's a problem. There's also inflammation, though. Inflammation because of whatever is causing the damage, such as arthritis or some autoimmune disorder, injuries. Inflammation, when it's chronic in nature, also stimulates pain fibers that send pain signals to the brain. So obviously, if you want to address that problem, you want to both address the pain signaling as well as the inflammation that is occurring in that area, stimulating the pain nerves. Okay? So if we talk about the two very well-known compounds of THC and CBD, they both do a good job with reducing inflammation and pain signaling in the body, okay, in very novel ways. It does it very differently from opiates. This is why you're hearing this conversation. I've known for 8 years that cannabis is the replacement for opiates, this first line. If we wanted a healthier world and country, we would be treating pain and lots of other conditions first with cannabis, and pharmaceutical drugs second or third, believe it or not. To me, it's actually cannabis, dietary changes, lifestyle changes first, pharmaceutical drugs after that, okay? This is a very important change in our thought processes because the cannabis plant holds so many promises in it and has been known for thousands of years. Did you know that the first school of cannabis medicine and science is over 5,000 years ago? Emperor Shang Nung in 2475 BC had brought together academics and medicine people to study the cannabis plant in early China. That's how old this medicine actually is. Up until the 1930s, most doctors in this country did home visits with their black doctor's bags that we've all heard about. Most doctors carried a bottle of cannabis tincture in their doctor's bag, along with their stethoscope and everything else. How come we don't know this? How come doctors who are medical students and doctors like myself who were educated and trained in the 90s, we never heard of this. We never knew about this. I'll tell you why. This history about cannabis has been wiped out of history books. Wiped out of the scientific textbooks about where this plant has come from. How deep the experience has been with cannabis, how thoroughly proven that it is a beneficial, non-harmful medicine that's been used, and yes, a recreational product too. But guess what, folks? When you have one glass of wine, one beer, you are actually killing brain cells and you're killing liver cells, you're killing immune system cells. One drink. You smoke a joint, you don't kill a single thing in your body. So why is it that maybe many people in this room believe that, not the cannabis people, but people who are new to this, why is it that we believe that smoking pot kills brain cells? Where does that come from? It comes from the reefer madness era. Okay? There was a concerted effort in the 30s before the Marijuana Tax Act was passed to demonize this plant as much as possible, to use racism, in fact, to demonize it, to scare the American public, to convince the public why we should ban marijuana, which is a Mexican slang term. I never use that word marijuana. To me, marijuana is a recreational term. You want to go get high? That's marijuana. Cannabis is the scientific, and it's always been the scientific name for the plant. So I advise you to use the word cannabis, okay? And get away from the marijuana usage. Because the marijuana, there's nothing wrong with recreating. I'd rather somebody recreate with cannabis than alcohol. There's clear benefits health-wise to your recreation with cannabis, okay? So, back to your question. First, the issue is with your wife, you know, degenerative spinal issues, and what was the other condition that she's dealing with?
Fibromyalgia.
Fibromyalgia. Okay, fibromyalgia is fascinating because the rates of fibromyalgia is skyrocketing, and we don't quite understand why.
And when she was first diagnosed, first of all, it took a long time for diagnosis because nobody knew about it, or everybody, I don't believe it.
Correct, correct. There's actually a doc right in Lake Oswego that used to do work with me, Dr. Ginevra Lipton. You should look her up. She's a fibromyalgia specialist. She's awesome, and she's very supportive of the use of cannabis for treating fibromyalgia. Okay? Fibromyalgia, in essence, is a nervous system that is sending pain signals to the brain without there being any pathology in the body. Meaning, you know, if they say, I have back pain, I have arm pain, leg pain, and you go and you study those areas, you biopsy them, you do EMGs and MRIs and CT scans, you cannot find anything wrong anywhere in those organs. So the only explanation is that it's the signaling inside the nervous system. Okay, the processing of pain in the body is complicated. You know, normally we get injured. The nerve cells here that notice the injury, they're designed just to sense trauma and injuries and inflammation. And they send a signal. The signal goes to a local little nerve node, like a little processing center. It decides, is this an important enough level of pain for me to let the next station know? And so if it is, it sends it to the spine. At the level of the spine, there's also another area where it processes signals of pain and other sensation. It decides also, is this important enough for me to send to the brain and let the main control center know? Okay? Then the signal gets to your brain. Now you're aware of discomfort in your body. So the processing of pain is very complex. And fibromyalgia is one of these conditions that our suspicions are that there's a dysfunction in that nerve mediation in the nervous system. And so it's sending an alarm to the brain without there being a reason, without there being a cause for the pain. So it's very interesting. CBD, as an example, is a compound that's been studied for quite some time. There's still a lot more studies to be done. Again, we're being blocked from doing human clinical studies in the United States because it's a Schedule I drug. The government decided without any scientific basis that they already know it has no benefits and it's really dangerous for you. Right? So ever since they scheduled it Schedule I, they actually never had scientific evidence for it to be Schedule I. They still don't. Okay, and they still are, you know, digging their heels in right now. It won't last long. But CBD has some very interesting properties on the way it interacts in the nervous system. In fact, in 1996, the government quietly and secretly took out a patent on the neuroprotective effects of CBD and cited 50 studies, scientific studies, to support that idea by taking studies from around the world that were done on mice and other subjects to support their patent. They got their patent, by the way. Okay. CBD has an ability to control or moderate pain signaling in the body without blocking pain signaling, which is what opiates do. The reason opiates are so addictive and so difficult to manage is because when you take opiates, it blocks pain so effectively, right, that the body becomes dependent on that opiate, okay? And so when you remove the opiates, you start getting withdrawal symptoms from it because it literally blocks pain signaling and it interacts with the brain receptors in a way where as the opiates wear out and go away, get out of your system, now your brain and your nervous system becomes more irritated than it was before you took the opiates. So now you need more opiates to get the same level of comfort. And when it wears off, now your nervous system is more irritable than it was before. And this is why opiates is a really vicious cycle drug. It ramps up the patient's dependence on it in order to maintain a level of pain control. And so CBD is a baseline. It's a safe medicine. You can't kill yourself with CBD. I mean, literally, you can take bottles of my tincture back there and drink it, and you wouldn't hurt yourself. You can't hurt yourself with it. What we call the toxicity window is so wide that it would take many hundreds to over 1,000 or 2,000 milligrams of CBD before you start seeing a little bit of liver inflammation. Okay. Secondary is the THC compound. Right? THC is also highly effective, more effective pain-relieving compound than CBD. It does it in a different way. It's also an anti-inflammatory, but of course you have to deal with the psychoactive effect or the high effect. And that's where you can do it on your own. Again, THC is also safe, as long as you don't get behind the wheel of a car while you're severely intoxicated on it. But Using THC effectively for pain relief takes a little bit more expertise. It's either experience or good guidance on how to use it effectively. And here's an important thing to understand about THC for pain and other conditions. You don't have to be high from it in order to get the benefits. This is a misunderstanding. Okay? The idea is that somehow every time if you need THC for pain, you have to be stoned in order to get the pain. That's not always true. You can actually take lower doses of THC when you don't feel high and you get pain relief. In fact, patients who are using cannabis THC products chronically, they actually don't feel high anymore. Their brains have adjusted to the THC levels in a way where it's no longer making them stoned, but it's providing relief in pain. Okay? So that's kind of a basic answer for you.
Now, do you find that it's the combination of the two that has the most?
Yes, again, the idea of the team approach to cannabis, synergistic use, yes, combining CBD and THC gives you much more pain relief than either one of them alone. But it also depends on the type of pain. It's not a blanket statement.
Oh, sure.
There's different types of pain. Fibromyalgia is a type of pain. Neuropathic pain is another type of pain. Acute organic, what we call organic or nociceptive pain is a different type of pain. If you cut yourself, break a leg, there are different types of pain. And CBD and THC act on different types of pain differently as well. Okay, so understanding the type of pain, like for example, diabetic with neuropathic pain. The THC is going to help to some degree, but the better compound for neuropathic pain is CBD because again, CBD has these effects on the nervous system that are very different from THC. It's neuroprotective and neurorestorative. Okay, it regenerates damaged nerve fibers. We've seen in spinal cord injury patients that if you give them CBD right away after they injure their spinal cords, you can actually minimize the amount of damage to their spinal cord or their brain. Okay, we saw in a very large study on something like 10,000 patients that have visited the emergency rooms, and of the patients who come in for strokes, right? So an acute brain injury. Patients who admitted on their surveys that they were active cannabis users, recreational users, smoking pot. Patients who are using cannabis recovered faster and with less disability from their strokes than non-cannabis users. Okay? That is one of these confirmatory pieces of data that supports what I've been seeing for years in the scientific side of the research on mice and cell studies. And in my patient population, that clearly shows that the compounds in cannabis provide a protective effect on the brain and other organs as well.
And cell regrowth as well?
Yes, yes. We have shown that we can actually grow brain cells with cannabis. Okay? We've taken...
We're going to get smarter. Yes.
Yes, we can actually... So two things that are very important that I know everybody's interested in. One is that we took there was a study where we took two groups of mice. We fed one group a standard diet, and we fed the other group with CBD. And we purposely caused brain injuries to these poor mice. Okay, we continue feeding them their diets, and then we autopsy them a couple of months later to see what has happened inside their brain at the areas where we injured their brain on purpose. And what we see in the CBD mice is that where their brains have been damaged, they're growing new brain cells. And they also have less neurologic injury than the non-CBD mice. Okay?
So do you recommend a one-to-one?
So,
I mean, is there something, I'm looking for some guidance.
Yeah, so you're starting to get into a little bit more detailed, so I have a clinic called Green Earth Medicine Clinic. It's on Sandy Boulevard. It's a great idea to come in for a consultation. Okay. And you can have a lot of these detailed guidances on how to use cannabis. There's a lot of folk remedy ideas like 1-to-1 or 5-to-1s. These have grown out of the conventional folk remedy cultivation practice of growing cannabis because certain plants put out a 1-to-1 ratio and other plants put out a 5-to-1 or 5-to-2. And so that's what the cannabis world has been using for a long time, and they notice, oh, well, yeah, if you use a 1-to-1, it works better for pain, it doesn't get you as high. 5-to-1 doesn't get you high at all practically, but works better for seizures than pain. Where we are today in terms of scientific application of cannabinoids, and we have to be very careful even in the language we use. I can't say the word treat. Did you know that to use the word treat when it comes to any kind of compound herb, if you use that word treat, heals, that's an FDA-owned word. You have to spend $1 million or $125 million to be able to use the word treat or heal. If you want to take an herb out of your garden and say, I can treat or cure somebody's whatever with this, you better be ready to come up with $125 million to get through the FDA approval process, to use that legally, okay? So, you know, I have to be very careful when I say treat or heal. But it's undeniable, right? We've known for thousands of years and actively today that patients are treating and healing their own cancers and pain conditions and seizure disorders, autoimmune disorders, lots of conditions with cannabis. Yep.
Can you elaborate on terpenes and what effect they have in the regime as far as prescribing a program for somebody?
Sure. So terpenes are fascinating. It's the next area, and then there'll be another one coming soon called flavonoids that everybody's going to get excited about. You know, CBD's been the rage, but there's the next CBDs are coming, CBC and CBG. So you're going to hear about these compounds soon too, okay, and more. Terpenes is that other group of compounds. Terpenes you already kind of are aware of. They're the aroma of plants. They're essential oils, okay, of the aromas of plants. And so if you take these terpenes into your body or even smell them, here's a really fascinating example I like to tell patients. So for thousands of years, there's always been this reputation, lavender is relaxing, right? So the terpenes that produces that smell of lavender, this is a very interesting study. So if I hook you up to an EEG brain scanner, right, that monitors your brain waves, and I have you smell lavender, in our normal waking state, we're in these alpha beta wave states where they're kind of jagged like this. When I give you the smell of lavender, you can see an immediate slowing of brain activity into a more relaxed brain pattern. Okay? Instantly. Now think about this. This is a little tiny molecule that floats through the air into your nose, binds to a receptor in your nose, sends a signal to your brain, and it says, relax right now. It happens that fast. It's pretty sophisticated medicine, in my opinion, if you learn how to use that. Now, imagine putting these compounds into your body, right? Now, you have to be careful. Terpenes can be toxic. It doesn't require much. So you don't want to go take your, you know, that's why they tell you don't ingest aromatherapy oils. They can be toxic. It doesn't take much to have benefit, and it doesn't take much to cause yourself toxicity with it, right? In the cannabis plant, there are tons of terpenes, okay? And the terpenes also have their own clinical effects on cancer, on pain, on mood disorders, lots of things. But I'll give you an example. If you're not aware, I'm going to give you a quick explanation. So if you're recreating with cannabis, there's these general categories that are, from a scientific perspective, no longer the right terms, indica and sativa. But this is what the industry has been using for many years, and it's easy to explain to patients, so we'll keep using it. The indica recreational cannabis, if you smoke it or eat it, it tends to be a relaxing, sleep-inducing strain, all right, or a group of cannabis. You have the sativas. They are known as the opposite. They give you energy. They get you all happy. People want to go dancing and have a good time. If you look at the THC molecule, so it's two different kinds of highs, is what I'm saying, right? One high is relaxing, and one high is uplifting. But if you go and you examine the THC molecule between those two groups of plants, it's identical. The THC molecule looks exactly the same. So why the difference in the high? The difference is because of the terpenes. Okay? To some degree, other cannabinoids too. There are other cannabinoids that do different things. So I want you to think about it this way. If the high is, I'm going to make an analogy, right? So if getting in a car and starting it up and going down the road is the high of THC, the terpene is what drives the direction of the car. Which direction do you want to go in with this experience? That's the terpenes. The terpenes add a certain color, flavor to the experience of the THC. That's just talking about the high though, right? We're not even begun to discuss the medical properties. So what happens when you begin to control or use different levels of cannabinoids, meaning CBD or THC, CBG, CBC, and also adjust the levels of the terpenes? And the answer is, I can tell you right now, over the many years of actually traveling the state, taking care of patients, meeting with growers, laboratories that make these medicines, and then using them on patients for their cancers and for kids' seizures and so forth, I can tell you this. Right now, we say there's about 12,000 different strains of cannabis in the world, right? Because humans are breeding them and trying different techniques to try to cross them. There's so many strains. Ultimately, what matters is not the name of the strain. What matters is when you extract these compounds from the plant, what levels of these different compounds are in there. It's like saying, I have a kitchen where I have 333 different ingredients, and I'm a chef, and I select these ingredients, which ingredients to put in there and how much to put in there. This will create a recipe of cannabinoids and terpenes that has a clinical effect on particular diseases. And it begins to explain how come I can take a strain of cannabis, give it to somebody with colon cancer that cures their colon cancer. But if I take that same exact strain and I give it to somebody with prostate cancer, it doesn't touch the prostate cancer. How come? This other strain will cure that man's prostate cancer. The secret is in that recipe. Okay? That's the thing. Here's where it gets really interesting too, right? And this is more advanced scientific work that's going to take a long time for us to decipher. It also is dependent on your individual genetics, your own DNA, your own phenotypic, genetic individuality. How you interact with different cannabis cultivars also will determine how well you respond to that particular strain. Just like if you have certain types of breast cancer or certain types of lung cancer, they'll respond differently to different strains. Okay, so becoming very sophisticated, understanding which profiles works better with different types of genetics of either cancer or any condition is going to be the future of how cannabinoid therapy is going to be done. Okay, so understanding the plant's genetics and its profile it pumps out against the type of disease condition that the patient has, and also their own genetic predispositions.
And as far as the delivery system, what do you think is the most effective? Is it smoking a joint, vaping, eating great chocolate, having olive oils?
Yeah.
Which way would you suggest?
Okay, so these are all what we call routes of administration. Okay? It's just a way of applying the compounds to your body, right? So for me, just break it down to the basics. Either you're putting it on your skin, which is called topical, you're inhaling it, whether it's burning it or vaporizing it, is an oil that vaporizes. We've been coming out with now basically dry powdered formulas that can be inhaled like an asthma inhaler. Okay? So, and then there's GI. There's multiple routes of GI administration. You can either leave it here under the tongue and let it absorb in through the skin of your mouth. You can swallow it down into your GI tract. You can put it up your butt. Okay? Rectal. Intravaginal. Women are treating cervical cancers, vaginal cancers by doing suppositories as well. So these are different ways of getting cannabinoids into the body or onto the body. Now, classically, since the 80s, when they did what we call PK studies, physiologic studies, that is, we made cannabis products, we gave it to people through these different routes, and we measured blood levels of the compounds as they enter the body. What we found was that the most rapid way to get cannabis in your body is to inhale it. Okay? And so if you measure that, it looks like this. Somebody takes a puff of a cannabis cigarette, the levels of THC or CBD, whatever you're measuring, it spikes up like almost within 5 to 10 minutes. It's very high, then it drops off very rapidly like this. So within it peaks at about 15 minutes, and by an hour or two, it's already at very low levels in the body. So it's a somewhat great recreational way to use cannabis. It's not a great medical way to use cannabis. Well, let me revise that. if what you're needing is to address something just very temporarily, it is a great medical way. So if somebody has an anxiety disorder, okay, and they take an indica vaporizer pen, which is what I would recommend, and they take a couple of puffs, within a couple of minutes the anxiety is softened for them. That's a great way to do it, right? Or if you just have trouble falling asleep at night and you take a couple of puffs of an indica, you're going to be drowsy in 15 minutes and you just drift off to sleep, okay? But if you're needing long-acting effects, persistent long-term effects, 6 to 8 hours of a dose. Let's say you got cancer. You don't want to take your medicine that goes in for 1 hour and is gone, and 2 hours later. It's not going to be effective for fighting your cancer. You need to bring your medicine in and maintain a therapeutic level 24/7. All right? So when you're needing that kind of therapeutic level, now you're wanting to now ingest it. But here's the problem. Edibles, okay, which is so popular, they're the worst, most expensive way to spend money on cannabis products. You know why? Because when you eat cannabis, the total amount of cannabinoids that you get into your bloodstream, where it actually is going to travel around and do any good for you for like medical conditions, you get 6% of your cannabis in your body, into your bloodstream. So that's, what that means is that if you spend $10 on an edible and you ate the whole thing at once, you get 60 cents worth of medicine into your bloodstream. That's a tremendous waste of money, in my opinion. Okay?
Did you say 60 or 6?
60 cents
Okay,
out of $10.
Okay, but it's, so you eat
6%. So 6% efficiency is what we would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why then do you feel it so much more strongly when you
It's
eat
because okay. So here's where we're going next. It's because when you eat something, when you eat cannabis, first thing happens, hits the stomach. Stomach puts out acid. Acid starts to destroy a lot of your cannabinoids. You haven't even gotten into your bloodstream yet. Okay. Now, if you have stomach cancer, that's a great way to do it. You can put the cannabinoids right there at the cancer. It'll start affecting the cancer. The problem, though, is that the stomach acids begin to degrade all the cannabinoid compounds, THC, CBD, all of it. And then it goes to the next part of your digestion, which is your small intestine. Now the pancreas pumps out enzymes that further degrade cannabinoids. Third step, it goes into the liver. The liver's job is to break everything down in the body. It does some metabolic compounding as well. It builds new molecules and sends it out to different parts of the body to be used. But when it comes to cannabinoids, it also breaks the cannabinoid compounds down. And what it does is it takes delta-9 THC, which is the natural form of THC, and it breaks into delta-11 THC. Delta-11 THC is a very long-acting THC, and it's also a very sedating, kind of a body-heavy effect. If you've ever done a lot of edibles, most people know what that is. Or if you eat too much of it, you'll know what that is. It's a very horrible experience. It makes you nauseous and feel horrible, and it lasts a long time. And so what you're feeling is that delta-11 effect. Okay, now delta-11 has benefits. It does fight cancer. How well it fights cancer versus delta-9 is not very well studied or understood just yet. Okay, suffice it to say, you're still only getting a fraction of the cannabinoids you put into your mouth. Okay, now, like our company, we're working on some concepts using other natural plant products that actually helps reduce the amount of breakdown of cannabinoids as is being absorbed into the bloodstream. And so we've been able to take, we're showing that we can take the 6% and multiply it up to about 5 times. So we can get GI absorption up to the 30% range is what we're hoping for. Because we see GI as a viable means of using medicine in general. The only problem has been this really horrible efficiency of GI administration. Rectal has been actually really, from day one, very great. Because you can put a rectal dose of cannabis oil, and obviously the oil just sits there in the rectum, just slowly absorbing. So in its own way, it's kind of like a slow release way of using cannabis. And we're seeing that it's at minimum 13 to 18% efficient at getting cannabinoids into the bloodstream. So that's been a very effective, long-acting way of using cannabis as well. Topical, you really can't get much into the bloodstream topically. There are some techniques, patches, types of patches, but also the kind of compounds you put into the patches is very important to help move the cannabinoids across the skin barriers into the bloodstream. But really, topical should be understood as more like a locally acting product, right? So you got some arthritis in the wrist or hands or elbow or wherever, you can apply it to that region. It helps in that region. It's not going to get you high, okay? Even if you put THC on the skin.
So therefore, we're back to vaping.
No, vaping is just another option. Again, vaping is short. Just think of vaping, if we're talking about medical, right? Vaping is a short-acting tool, cannabis medical tool. So short, quick-acting, which we all want. If we had your migraines coming on, you need something to start working now, right? If you have anxiety, a panic attack, you need something to work now. So vaping is a quick way to get it in your system and to be effective, but it's going to be short-acting.
Well, then you could just do another hit.
You could, but then you're going to be doing this all day and night long. That's not effective. See, this is one of the problems with people using it for insomnia that I've seen repeatedly. Yeah, take a puff. It's going to help you relax and fall asleep, but what happens when it wears off 2 hours later and you wake back up? Are you going to be smoking pot all night long in order to stay asleep? No, most people don't want that. So what's been effective is, take a tincture, for example, right? It absorbs in about 30 minutes, peaks out at about 2 hours, generally stays for a good 6 hours before it trails off. So, somebody who wants to get to sleep and has problems falling asleep and staying asleep, they can take a puff, take their tincture, go to bed. So by the time their inhalational dose wears off, their tincture dose is still kicking in, and it will help them maintain.
So tincture, you're really just holding it in your mouth and it's being absorbed locally.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Time of the time.
So what about, really quick, because we do chocolate,
Yeah.
we encourage people to let it melt in their mouths sublingually.
Yeah.
And to let it all dissolve in their mouths.
Yeah.
So are we jumping the edible, the waste component by letting it do
Absolutely.
what a tincture would do?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. The absorbability up in the mouth is pretty excellent, for cannabinoids. It works better even if you use things like alcohol, which is why tinctures classically from old school herbalism practice of any kind of plant medicine using alcohol, because alcohol helps the cannabinoids what we call migrate or transmigrate across the linings of the skin, basically.
And so they're jumping the GI tract then?
Correct.
In that sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
Is there any negative of vaping, like on the lungs or anything? Is it?
No, interestingly, there's so many of my answers to you folks is going to be, gosh, we need more research, right? Just like in the video, it's so true. They've been blocking basic research that's really about protecting the public health. It prevented us from doing these studies. I'm actually starting a clinical trials project in New Zealand. Because the government of New Zealand is inviting us down with open arms. And here's lots of money. Please do take your knowledge and expertise and do some clinical validation studies for us. Show us, you're telling us that you could cure cancers with this. You can treat seizures. You can treat pain. Study it. Give us the raw data, not just how it works, but what are the risks or side effects of using different types of products. Now, when it comes to vaporizing, it's really interesting. There was a study done about 15 years ago in Jamaica. There's a lot of people smoking pot in Jamaica, and they took a bunch of patients who smoked a lot of pot every day, and they separated them out specifically from patients who were smoking pot and tobacco, just pot smokers, and they put them through pulmonary function testing. That means you have to breathe in a tube and see what your lung capacity is and so forth. How well does your body exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide? What they found was that actually cannabis smokers had normal lung functioning compared to normal people. It was when they combined tobacco and cannabis together, which in the streets it's called blunts, right? You combine tobacco. It tastes really good if you ever try it. But I don't do that anymore because I was stuck on tobacco for a long time, so I can't have any tobacco. But that's really bad for your lungs to combine tobacco and cannabis together. But interestingly, here you're burning this stuff, you're getting ash and tar, okay, into your lungs with cannabis, but their pulmonary function testing was normal, right? Now, we need an update study, to be quite honest with you. But here's the thing. Asthma patients are using cannabis to control their asthma, folks. It's the truth. They shouldn't smoke it. They should vape it. Now, if you've never tried vaping, you will cough when you vape. That's because you're inhaling a mist that has been heated. And that heated mist going into your lung is going to irritate your lung because of the heat. And that's what's making you cough, but it's actually not damaging your lung. The opposite, because you can see this in asthmatics. What is going on in asthmatics? Inflammation and bronchospasm, which means that all the airways, they're surrounded by rings of muscle. And asthmatics have a tendency to their muscles spasm, and so it blocks off their airways. Okay, that's why they wheeze and they can't breathe. Well, cannabis is anti-inflammatory and muscle relaxing. So you can actually vaporize and relax your lungs and reduce the inflammation and get over your asthma faster.
So has this new development of like popcorn lung, people use like vaping and then developing, is like, I don't know.
Yeah, so the
really know
popcorn
much
lung
about it.
thing is a different conversation. This is, when we talk about like vaping in general, like when it comes to nicotine vaping, the problem with those products is that they use propylene glycol, okay, which is this molecule that's used in a lot of food products, but rarely has it been used for pulmonary administration. But we know this from studies that have been done on poor little rabbits, where they literally put a mask on their faces and just have PG, propylene glycol mist that they have to breathe 24 hours a day. And what they find is that these rabbits develop early onset pulmonary fibrosis, scarring their lungs and damaging their lungs until they can't breathe or exchange oxygen. So all these guys that are walking around doing these big clouds of nicotine vapes, they're gonna be really sorry, because in a short period of time they're all gonna be carrying oxygen bottles with them. And it's just one of these crazy fads that it's driving me nuts seeing it, because the industry, I think, is doing a horrible effect, health promotion effect of this product. Cannabis is different. There was a time when vaping, cannabis vapes just started coming out. They thought they needed to do the same thing, because when you extract cannabis oil, it's very thick. It's thicker than honey. And so to get that to vape well, you have to thin it something. And so they thought they'd do the same thing as the nicotine vapes. They started putting PGs in it to thin it out so it's easier to vape. But now we've become smart and we've decided, no, that's not safe. At most, you should do a little bit of laboratory grade alcohol to thin it out slightly so it vapes. But now the next thing is to add a little bit of actually terpenes, because terpenes themselves will thin. It doesn't take very much. Just a little bit of terpenes will thin the cannabis oil enough to make it a very viable vape product. And so you'll see that out there now. So when you vape these products, when you used to vape just pure cannabis oil, it didn't really have a flavor. Maybe it tasted a little chemically or a little oily. But now a lot of the better products, they actually taste like lemons or strawberries. There's actually a pleasant aroma to them. But they actually have benefit as well.
So some people are concerned, they're on blood pressure medications, or diabetics.
Yeah, drug interactions.
Drug interactions.
Drug interactions. I get this asked every single consultation. There's many questions that get asked. But yeah, drug interactions. I can tell you that over the many years of doing this, there's very few drug interactions. Chemotherapies, blood pressure medications, blood thinners, antidepressants, pain medications. I'll start with pain medications. It used to be, not many years ago, just 4 or 5 years ago, there was this, again, very frustrating dealing with the government, dealing with the conventional healthcare system, where they have beliefs that are like almost religious zealots in nature, where they just hang on to a belief and they're not going to let go of it, even when you provide the science in front of them. And one of the beliefs was, you can never use cannabis and take opiates. Oh my God, you're going to die. You're going to overdose and die. Never saw that before. I've never seen this. I was open to it. Okay, yeah, it could make sense. Cannabis is an intoxicant. maybe it'll make the opiates worse. So I started telling my patient, yeah, just be careful with your opiates. Let's ramp you up on the cannabis and cut your opiates down, right? Which everybody wanted. And most of my patients actually got off of opiates. I mean, that's where the beginning of my work in Green Earth Medicine Clinic, 90% of the people walking in was trying to get off, to either treat pain or get off of opiates. And we did successfully 90% of the time get people off their opiates. That's no-brainer, folks. Like, get that word out there to all your friends and family. If you want to treat your pain and get off of opiates and actually become healthier as a result, get on cannabis. You know, good medical cannabis under good guidance. Okay, this is true. But the science is now proven very clearly, just like the rest of us cannabinoid scientists have been saying for many years, the way that THC and CBD interacts with brain receptors has nothing to do with how opiates work. They're not working in the same ways. So there's no reason to have a suspicion that it would make the opiates worse or that it would multiply the effect of the opiates in any way. So don't worry about that. When it comes to these other conditions, these other drug classes, cannabis does moderately lower blood pressure. We also use that as a benefit because people can reduce their dependence on blood pressure medications that have a lot of negative side effects. And so a lot of my patients get that benefit. Taking sometimes just CBD alone, they're getting a 10 to 15% reduction in their blood pressure. And so they're able to come down on their blood pressure medications. Blood thinners, no effects on blood thinners. Chemotherapy, my gosh, I don't know how many years and how many thousands of times I've had to help reassure patients because their oncologists would all say, don't you dare use cannabis while you're on my chemotherapy or I will cut you off. I will give you chemotherapy. You know, it's horrible. I mean, literally, they started that with the opiates, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen vets and just average people being shamed and humiliated, tongue lashed by their doctors because, you know, the conventional system sees you as a drug addict when you admit to the use of cannabis, even when you say you're using it for medical reasons. I've had 70-year-old ladies who wanted to try cannabis for their pain relief and admit that to their primary, and then they get drug tested every single time like a drug addict. And they get their pain medications withdrawn from them. They get talked down to. I mean, that was really bad about anything before 3 years ago. This was a constant thing that patients have to experience. Now, something to understand when it comes to the general conversation of drug interactions, just know this. Cannabinoids get processed by your liver. There's an enzyme system called CYP450. There's a bunch of different enzyme systems, and these enzyme systems are there to break down different kinds of compounds in the body. Everything you put in your body, food, medicine, it goes to the liver for processing. CYP450 metabolizes lots of different compounds besides cannabinoids, okay? So just understand that if you're taking cannabis medicine at a significant dose, that means your liver is busy processing it. So if you're also at the same time taking pharmaceutical drugs that are also metabolized by CYP450, it's like a factory that, you know, it has a certain ability to churn through material. And so if you start giving it a bunch of materials to churn through, it's obviously not going to be able to do it at the same speed. It's going to get slowed down because it's processing so many compounds all at once. And the more you give it, the more. So you can imagine there's going to be a backup, right? This material that's coming into the factory that needs to get broken down, there's a backup because there's so many of them being pushed through this one pathway of metabolism. So you've got your cannabis, you've got your blood pressure medicine, you've got your chemotherapy, you've got pain pills, so if you have a bunch of these drugs you're trying to push through this CYP450 enzyme system, just realize that there's going to be a buildup of the drug levels, whatever they may be. Cannabinoids, chemo, blood thinners, blood pressure medications, okay? There's going to be a backup. So the smart way to do it is, okay, start with the compounds that are non-toxic to the body. Cannabis is non-toxic to the body. None of the compounds in cannabis damage any cells in the body when taken at the appropriate dosages. Right? Pharmaceutical drugs, you can never say that. Just read the package insert, know what they can do to you, and you'll know that there's toxicity associated with putting a chemical compound in the body, right? Pharmaceutical drugs are, by the way, folks. Synthetic chemicals concocted in a laboratory and put in your body. That's what they are, okay? So, the way I do it with my patients simply is I monitor the drugs they're on. And if I see that they're competing for the same enzyme system as with the cannabis dosing that I'm doing, I give them advice and instructions, by their doctor's advice and instructions, about how to control those other drug levels. So maybe they don't need as much blood pressure medication or pain medications or even chemotherapy, okay? Because you don't want to overwhelm the liver with its functioning of breaking these compounds down, okay? And it's just another area where, again, you know, expert medical advice with somebody who actually has been doing this with cannabis for many years is really crucial. There just aren't doctors out there, you know. And I'm just going to do a little tangent because it's a really important piece of information for you guys to know. Thankfully, there's lots of scientific information about cannabis now out there, and doctors are finally starting to try to learn what those are, which is great, but understand that what they're learning is scientific information about CBD and THC and what they might do. Here's the problem. To become a doctor, you go through medical school. And in medical school, you learn all the scientific stuff about the body, about chemistry, about compounds, and how they work in the body. And then you spend another 4 to 8 years of your life in residency. Residency is now taking all that intellectual knowledge and using it on real patients, giving them that dose, seeing what the side effects are. If you cause a side effect, learning how to fix that problem. Here's the problem. Right now, throughout the country and the world, there's more and more doctors, unfortunately not enough, who are actually motivated to go learn scientific data about cannabis. But for them to learn how to actually apply and use it on patients, there's no mechanism for them to do that. Unless you do what I do, which is leave your very, luxurious, cushy lifestyle and career and go into cannabis and work with it every day, work with patients every day, work with laboratories that specialize in cannabis and actually apply it to the patient and begin to learn what we call clinical-based experience, okay? So I just want you to know that difference when you're talking to a doctor who says, yeah, I took some continuing medical education credits on cannabinoids. Okay, great, you've got some intellectual knowledge, but having experience also matters, You can educate the smartest brain in the world on neurosurgery out of textbooks, but until that guy has enough, cases under his belt, you might not want to have that guy cut the brain open for the first time. So just be mindful of that.
My other question is now we can grow our own plants.
Yeah.
Tell me what you think about juicing, taking some of those big leaves in the morning and putting them in my smoothie.
I think juicing is an incredible potential for self-driven health, practice in your garden. I've known for many years of patients with cancers and MS and other conditions just juicing the raw leaves from their plants, growing plants just for the leaves and not for the flowers, just to juice it. There's a lot of compounds in the cannabis plant, from the root on up to the flower. The flower is not the only valuable part of the plant. There's compounds all over the plant in different levels. The leaves are cheap and easy to pick off and juice. Make sure you juice it really fresh, literally the same moment, the same day that you take the plant, the leaves off. And know also that the juice itself is prone to molding very quickly. So you can't keep it around. You need to literally juice it, pack it, freeze it, and then pull out only the packets that you need for the next day or two to thaw and drink. You only need about a shot of it a day on average. There are some GI side effects from juicing because you're not just juicing cannabinoids. You're getting all sorts of plant material, and plant matter, and waxes, and fats, and other chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the green part of the plant. It's going to irritate your GI, make you get acid reflux and burning stomach aches and diarrhea and all sorts of stuff. But I think there's ways to refine the juice. It can be done professionally, and our company is working on a project to actually create juicing. So juicing, though, is, I think, a very viable future option also.
And where do you see the medical patients in the state of Oregon? We're seeing, I think there are 4 medical dispensaries now. What's going to happen with the medical patients? Are we going to be losing that program?
Yeah, this is kind of angering and heartbreaking at the same time. What brought cannabis to the world are the medical patients. What brought cannabis to the state are the medical patients and the medical needs. And in the 15 or so years of the Oregon medical marijuana program, where in the recent past, the state was collecting over $8 million a year in fees to give people their licenses. Not one penny of that $8 million a year is ever spent on cannabis research, patient care, anti-drug programs. It all went into the state's bank account. None of it was ever applied to medical cannabis. None of it ever went to supporting medical cannabis patients, right? Because not only are patients having to pay $400 or $500 a year, seeing doctors, getting, and then paying the OMP $200 a year to get their license, they also have to pay for cannabis, And so, with this commercialization of recreational cannabis, the state just revealed themselves. I don't want to get myself in trouble politically in the state. I've already gone through so many battles with the Oregon Medical Board, and to see what happens, folks. It's not just with cannabis. If you look at every alternative concepts to health that has ever traveled through our system, starting back with the days of like acupuncturists and chiropractors, massage therapists, every single one of these industries that are about promoting health in some way, they've been suppressed, repressed, attacked, marginalized for decades, right? Before whoever's in control of these systems said, okay, you guys do legitimate work, we'll let you get licensed and do your thing. Cannabis is still inside of that repression stage right now, okay, because of the game the federal government's playing. And despite what we see with the state of Oregon being one of the early adopters of medical cannabis, the reality is that if you look at the money, and you look at the legislation, and you look at what's happening right now, they've done nothing but destroy the medical aspects of the program. And yet they're going to town on the commercialization and money-making of recreational cannabis. Rec farms can grow on 2 acres, grow thousands of cannabis plants and sell it so that people can get high. But if you want to be a medical grower, and many people have been doing this their entire lives, growing for their patients, taking care of their patients, giving patients free cannabis that's keeping them alive, those growers have been treated so harshly that most of them are abandoning medical growing for their patients. So, for me, I've spent my career, the beginning of my career in this world, I left my cushy office in the hospital, and I bought a Tahoe, Tahoe truck, which is still the one I drive. Right, it's parked right over there. Bought it 8 years ago, and I used to drive the state into every little town that I networked with, and I had a bed in the back of my truck or camping gear, and I would just go visit towns and see these patients in their homes, and because I was trying to learn what patients were doing that was succeeding, what growers were doing for patients, what strains they were growing. And the state has done nothing to support the ongoing, affordable way in which growers can make a living growing cannabis for their patients and supporting their patients to receive free medicine. And they've been forced to go through these very expensive, laborious regulatory requirements to grow a very small farm. You're only allowed a maximum of maybe 48 plants at most. Okay, it's not a small amount, but compared to thousands of plants of a recreational farm, You know, so the medical growers and the patients who have been dependent on this system has been devastated by this. And it's one of the frustrations I have. And supposedly the benefit that patients are getting is you get to go buy it without paying taxes. That's it. That's all you're getting out of it. After being the people that cause cannabis to be available, you know, not just medically but recreationally, and driving the medical health realizations, being able to cure cancers and children's seizures, this is all they're getting, tax-free purchases.
Do I have any other questions here? Oh, Paul?
I've heard stories about it impacting short-term memory.
Remember the question?
So, listen, THC, which is the psychoactive compound, okay? If you're using it and abusing it on a daily basis, it's going to impact your memory. Just like if you're drinking alcohol every day, throughout the day, you're also going to have an impact on your memory. If you're smoking tobacco every day, it's going to affect your memory as well. Okay? So there's a lot of these negative effects of the THC molecule that have been exaggerated by using the example of people who are abusing cannabis, right? So everybody asks me, well, what if, you know, you say it doesn't kill brain cells, but I've known a lot of teenagers that smoked a lot of weed and they're just not right, not very bright. It's true. It's true. You know, when your brain is growing from the time you're a child until about age 25, it's making all sorts of neuronal connections. And if you're intoxicating the brain constantly with anything, alcohol, cannabis, or anything else, those connections aren't going to be normal. Your ability to learn and receive, process information is not as good. Okay? So the idea here is that, number one, the use of cannabis, that's why I said in the beginning, the use of THC doesn't necessarily require that you be high in order to get the medical benefits. It depends on what condition you're treating, which determines the dose of THC that you need to have in your body. So yes, if you're taking a large dose of THC because you're dying from a brain tumor, you know, not remembering where you put your keys might not be that big a deal. You know, but if you're just treating some moderate, mild pain, of course you don't want to be forgetting your keys every day or whether you lock the door or not when you left the house. So being able to control and moderate THC levels is very important. Something to remember is what I mentioned earlier too. If you're using the right types of medical strategies for applying THC, when we find an ideal dose for a patient and we keep them there, our brains, you know, and our bodies in general, it's smart. It has mechanisms to address everything that's happening to maintain homeostasis and balance in the body. And so that psychoactivity wears off. If you stay at a particular dose of THC, the psychoactivity wears away because the brain is changing the way it receives that message from THC, right? And so you can actually get to the point where you're on a consistent dose of THC every day. It's controlling that fibromyalgia, that pain, or your seizure, but you're no longer high. And because you're no longer high, it's no longer impacting your memory. Those studies that were done actually a long time ago, 80s and 90s, they were looking at pot smokers, daily recreational pot smokers, and whether they could remember details on a list. You know, you showed 10 things and let them look at it for a minute and then ask them an hour later if they remember those 10 things, right? And these were people who were smoking pot all the time. Not a fair assessment. Let's do that against somebody who's drinking beer all day also. See how many of those things they're going to remember. How come beer isn't illegal, you know?
Okay. Well, thank you. We got one more question in the back.
Sorry, just to kind of carry off on this also. I just saw a recent study of about 10,000 victims of crimes, and those who were intoxicated with cannabis didn't have any trouble picking out suspects the same way that someone who was sober during the crime happening did. So it was interesting.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I'm going to say something that's going to maybe add a little bit more shock to your system, okay? Right. So, Indomira, you know, we consider ourselves a phytopharmaceutical company. Phyto means plant, pharma is pharma. We are serious scientists looking and physicians looking at scientific application of cannabinoids, terpenes, and this plant and other plants. And here's the interesting thing. Cannabis has been talked about from it's a recreational substance or it's a health substance, right, or disease-modifying substance. But I'm going to make another proposal to you that hasn't been discussed much. Disease means you're in a hole. Let's say health is here. And disease means you're in the hole. And you're trying to climb out of the hole, trying to get yourself back to a normal state of health. Based on our experiences and research, I'm going to suggest to you there's another use of cannabis, which is to take you from your current state of health to better health. That means lowering your risk of cardiovascular disease, lowering your risk of Alzheimer's, lowering your risks of cancer, okay? And actually increasing your IQ. If you know how to use these compounds properly. It isn't just one or two compounds. There are many compounds. They have neuroprotective, neurorestorative, neurosupportive properties, folks. It actually can enhance your cognitive abilities. We are using cannabis on people with severe ADD that allows them to focus intensely for long periods of time on a task. In fact, it's now well known that extreme athletes that like to mountain bike and kayak, they're using certain types of strains of sativas that gives them several more hours of exercise endurance. We have computer programmers and coders who spend 12 hours a day staring at a screen programming super complicated lines of computer code that are smoking or using certain types of cannabis products to actually enhance their ability to focus on a task more deeply, uninterrupted. It completely defies everything you grew up hearing about cannabis. Okay? So not only does it bring you out of the hole of illness, but I'm suggesting to you that over time you're going to see that cannabinoids and terpenes, the compounds of cannabis, when used appropriately, can also elevate your level of functioning across many organ systems.
Well, I don't know about you, but that's very encouraging. Thank you so much, Dr. Christian Blair.